What if the strongest voice in the room doesn't need to raise it? In this episode, we're flipping the script on leadership and spotlighting the surprising power of introversion. Quiet doesn't mean passive, and it might just be your greatest leadership edge.
Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world.
Are you ready to create real change in your leadership, your career, your life? Join me for a complimentary Lead and Thrive session, a 60-minute one-on-one strategy session where we will discuss your specific needs and map out the next steps to lead yourself and others powerfully. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Visit transformyourperformance.com/Lead Thrive session to book your Lead and Thrive session today. Let's work together to make it happen. Welcome to the Rise to Lead podcast. With me today is Greg Weinger from Portland,
Oregon. Nice to be here, Regina.
Yeah, great to have you on, Greg. If you allow me, I'm just going to quickly introduce you to our audience. So Greg Weinger has spent over 20 years proving that introverts and unconventional thinkers, and I love the unconventional thinkers, Greg, they can thrive in leadership. A seasoned product and technology executive, he has helped scale startups 10 times to $70 million plus in revenue, leading teams that build market-leading digital products and drive business growth. Greg is the host of Powerful Introvert, a Substack publication and podcast dedicated to helping introverts unlock their leadership potential. A sought-after speaker, he challenges outdated leadership norms, love that too, and explores how organizations can create inclusive leadership structures that embrace diverse working styles. Now, I personally am supposedly an ambivert, so I can definitely relate to the introvert, and then also to the other part of it, to the extrovert. So yeah, I'm really curious for this conversation. Again, welcome.
Yes, thanks, Regina.
So Greg, I'm curious, as I just said, I'm a curious person in general. Curiosity is one of my top leadership traits. So what made you want to work with introverts and unconventional thinkers? I suspect there's a specific reason for that.
Absolutely. As it turns out, as I came to learn eventually that I myself was an introvert, and I didn't have the words for it. And after I had suspicions, I even resisted that for a pretty long time. And I always knew I was a little bit different. I thought I saw the world a little differently. Part of it was my upbringing. I grew up in a small city in the Midwest of the U.S., Peoria, Illinois. My family was Jewish. We were always, a little bit different. But again, I didn't have the words for it. I went to college. I had an opportunity to study creative writing and spend a little bit of time in introspection there. And that kind of clued me in a little bit more to some of my, my creativity but also some of my tendencies. I really liked spending that time alone, even though I like being out in public and, with friends and meeting people too. So what ended up happening is as I went into the world, and I was doing some writing, but I was also getting into software companies. And I started being really interested in leadership because I really wanted to have a bigger influence on the world. I saw possibilities, and I was like, I want to lead. And what I found was I wasn't encouraged. early in my career. And, part of the reason was I wasn't presenting as a leader, especially as that looks like in the United States. And so I was very achievement oriented. I had gone to Stanford. I just like, I can study, I could fix everything, including personality, right? You just study and then you kind of overcome that. Uh, but it kept on hitting headwinds and, as I rose, and eventually those headwinds became a bit of a brick wall. By the time I got into senior leadership, I was on the executive team reporting to a CEO. And that's where, I was just confronted with, personalities who were very obviously very different from mine. People are very confrontational, very direct, and I needed help. And that's where I sought executive coaching. I was very fortunate. My CEO, supported me in that. And I did a lot of personal work, and that came to some acceptance about my personality and also doing research. And one of the things that was a pivotal moment in my life history, I came across the work of Susan Cain, her book Quiet. She has an incredible TED Talk. I recommend to anyone who has not possibly seen it, because perhaps it's meaningful to you, and at the very least, it helps you understand at least half of the population around you. And that's where it really led me to uh, personal change in my work. When I saw how that it was transformational for me, I was I had kind of unknowingly, I've been mentoring and supporting introverts all my career, and they I had special advice for them because I shared the tricks for them that worked for me. And so it all clicked for me at one point. I said, I need to get this information out there, because what had happened to me was, especially starting around 2012 or 2013, there was kind of an explosion of awareness and information on the internet. So, as soon as I said, more people need to learn about this. It's like, I just have this one book, but, there's a whole, a slew of authors and fantastic websites and resources there. I can name a few. Um, but the word, this information wasn't reaching me. So I wanted to be part of getting this message out there and sharing that with the world.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful reason, actually, and thanks for explaining it so well to us. So, you were at a software company, you said,
Yeah,
and so did you find that there were a lot of introverts who do this type of work, like programming? That's at least what we sometimes think, right?
absolutely. It's the domain of introverts.
Mhm.
And part of, my perception growing up is growing up in the software industry as as rising as a leader, is I'm surrounded by people who are much more introverted than I am. And I was the one, speaking up and you know, help advocating for people and advocating for ideas I believed in. And so I had this perception as, I'm pretty outgoing. I'm not an introvert. This was, kind of the period of my life I was kind of in denial about this. I can be a leader. I'm not an introvert, not an introvert. And I get around salespeople and marketing people, and and like I'm introverted compared to a lot of those people. Not all of them. There's definitely introverts in that crew as well.
Mhm.
So you learn, you really get and appreciate when people are very much in that vein. You get a real appreciation for all their strengths. You need to give them a lot of time to prepare, and then you can't necessarily expect their best input right in the moment. Introverts are people who think before they speak, and they do their best thinking on their own independently. And so I'll give a presentation, and this is just normal day-to-day things. I give a presentation, a roadmap thing to my engineering team. We're on a call, and there will never be any questions. And I was like, are there any questions? I always have to ask, and I have to wait. There's never any questions, because I know that it's going to come out. And so I give it time, and then I follow up with people individually in Slack, or I wait for the engineering managers, and gradually the feedback bubbles up. And at first I was really worried. I was like, oh man, I bombed. They hate it. They think this is all terrible. Wasn't the case. It's like they loved it. And I was like, you couldn't tell, So it's very different working with extreme introverts versus people who are more comfortable thinking aloud and thinking as they speak.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you weren't even so aware that you were introverted, right? Because and that reminds me of myself. I thought I was a total introvert. I was on the other side of the
Hmm.
coin a little bit because I was so shy as a little girl, and even in my teenage years, and even later, So I actually thought I was much more introverted than extroverted. And then I did these tests and then it came out as ambivert. And it's actually true because, for example, if I go to a conference, then I'm very comfortable. I love to network there after you've gotten practice networking.
Hmm.
That's what shy people do. They get practice networking.
Hmm.
But then there is always a moment, like for example, in the evening when I need this me time, when I want to withdraw. So there's a limit to that social element in a way. Not limit, but you just need to, somehow have that harmony between the two.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. And in terms of harmony, there's a couple of concepts that in the literature and information about introversion that I found really helpful in clarifying these kinds of things because I too found it very confusing. It's like I love public speaking.
Mhm.
I love being social, in a party, and I don't with people that I know, and but a room of networking, that's kind of, that's a different story. But it was very confusing to me. And so one of the concepts was that introversion versus extroversion is different from shyness. And
Mhm.
you can have shyness is just social anxiety, fear of, what other
Yeah.
people are thinking. And you can have very shy extroverts.
Mhm.
And so what is introversion or extroversion? It's really about where are people energized. And so I draw my energy in silence, in being alone, and I need that, like you said, the downtime. I need a good amount of that, and then I can be very outgoing and social, and then like the classic example is the party. At the party, I've got about an hour and a half, especially if there's people I don't know, where I've got all the energy, and then I hit a wall, and I just like, okay, I have a very short battery in that situation. And on my very extroverted executive team, you know, it starts with pre-party and the party and the after party. Like the longer the party goes, the more energized they are. And I realized that, the wiring is just completely different. And that's okay. It's just how we are. It's how we're wired.
Yeah, I love that you explained the difference between shyness and introvertedness, because that's a really important difference. The reason also why I mentioned it is because it seemed like I was much more introverted than I really was because I was so shy, right? So
Yeah.
that was an external piece of it that was just intensified, or that impression that was intensified rather, right?
Right, right. And the other interesting thing about shyness is that, to your point earlier, shyness can be overcome. Through progressive exposure,
Mhm.
you can learn how to overcome your shyness, but you can't unlearn your introversion or your extroversion. And that was the part where, uh, when I was at war with myself, I was trying to fix it. I've fixed a lot of my shyness. I haven't fixed any of my introversion.
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
and it's realizing, okay, I don't need to.
yeah. There's
This
nothing
is
to be fixed there.
right, right. It's actually a strength.
Exactly. Yes. There's always a reason why we have both.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
need both in the world. And
Right.
I also like that you mentioned the speakers, right? Because there's a lot of speakers who are actually introverts. a lot of famous speakers who are introverts. So it's not a reason to not become a speaker if you want to. Very important.
Absolutely, or a leader. And you
Yeah.
think about you, it's just so it's so interesting how you can go around and you see the models around you, and you tend to think that the models around you are the only models that there are, and then but then you only need to look around or think about different domains. So also in terms of leadership, there's a lot of power that introverts bring to the table, and or can bring to the table just by through their ability to be quiet or to be silent. And oftentimes introverts are thinking in the moment. And it brings to mind the one of the most powerful kind of second in command that I've ever worked with. He was, he'd worked with the CEO for a very long time, and he was in meetings. He was a very quiet guy, and he didn't speak a lot. He would let the room debate and talk things over, and with experience, you knew that he had something to say and it was coming.
Mhm.
And you weren't always sure that you wanted to hear it. And then he would state his opinion at the end, and it just had such weight. And he was a super smart guy, and it was just always well thought through. And sometimes it stung, but he just used that silence as power. And this even extended to one-on-one conversations with him. He was somebody who could really hold silence and gave himself permission to be silent while he thought things through, even talking to you. And then you'd start to even think, is he thinking? What's going
Yeah.
on here? And then sometimes he'd say something super powerful or intelligent, and sometimes he would be like, okay, something like that. But that was really cool.
Yeah. And so, a lot of people still do think that leadership or attention belongs to the loudest person in the room, but oftentimes we can actually command extra attention by using silence also strategically, right? Because as a speaker, for example, as you walk on a stage, if you use a few moments of silence, oftentimes that brings the attention toward you. Or for a salesperson or anybody who does sales, sometimes the silence can actually make the sale.
Absolutely. That's the rhetorical pause can be so powerful.
Mhm. Yeah. So then, why are quiet people often still overlooked, and why shouldn't they be overlooked? Let's talk about that side of the coin and really, let's unpack that. What are the strengths? And you've mentioned a few, but maybe there's more there, I'm suspecting.
Yeah, and no, part of it is, it's a misconception that
Mhm.
just as we were talking about, that silence means they don't have something to say. And uh, I often say or tell introverted people, it's like you really need to give extroverts the benefit of the doubt, because they're trying to be helpful. And one of their magical skills is, especially if you go into a networking event with an extrovert, they're really skilled at making people feel at ease and feel comfortable in social situations, and introverts aren't always feeling comfortable. And so part of the way that they're really gifted at filling silence with clever, warm, kind things to say, that kind of thing. So, and where introverts and extroverts run into trouble is when, so the introvert needs that space to think, and the extrovert thinks, oh, I bet there's some quiet space, I better fill that in. And so that's where an introvert can feel like, oh, they're not respecting me, or they think I don't have anything to say. They can take that personally, when really it's just this mixture of styles. And so as an introvert, you need to give people the benefit of the doubt, and also recognize that there are ways that you can kind of claim that space and make sure, oh, your thought is heard.
Right. So awareness is very important, mutual
Mm-hmm.
awareness. Um, so how would you then redefine power for introverts?
Right. It's so the power is really about I think it's not just for introverts. I
Mhm,
believe that this is where power comes from for all people
mhm,
is in the ability to be still. And what I mean by that is when it's true power is presence. And if you are able to pause and be still, then you can be completely present in that moment. And presence is executive presence. All presence is the same. And if you've been in the room with someone who has this presence, it's something that's felt. Like you really feel that. And so I think that what happens to introverts in this situation is they can overlook their own power. They can overlook their access to their own power. But with the power to be still comes that ability to be very present in the moment and to connect with people and understand where people are and their wavelength and their, what are their emotions in that moment. And they can say the most appropriate thing on the basis of that. And so that's how where it comes into leadership in with other people, but it also comes into play when they're for anyone, introvert or extrovert, they're on their own. In being still, that's where your creativity comes from, and that's where your new ideas. And so it's really, we always think, the thinking mind, the rational mind is an amazing instrument. It's very useful, but the things that are new don't come from that. They come from something deeper from you. And it's in that capacity to be still is where you access that. So to me, that's power.
absolutely. The being present in the moment, right? That's it's such a gift when we use it. I just actually wrote an article about difficult conversations. We call them difficult conversations, but what if we could unmake that label and call them just conversations and really practice presence with the other person in that moment as part of doing that, right? Um, so I think that there's so much value in there, and uh, also, of course, presence as in business presence. That's
Hmm.
the other part of it. That's also where you can use this, right? Would you agree, Greg?
I totally agree. Yeah, you touched on something really powerful with in those difficult conversations because there's a tendency to try to prepare for those moments, and I think it's worthwhile doing. But
Mhm.
when something is difficult, there's almost no way to prepare for that. You really want to be completely responsive to the person, and the only way you can do that is by being present. You're not following a script or anything, and so that's what humanizes that moment and could even make it a healing moment for the person, or whatever, or for yourself, because you're able to connect over something that is difficult.
Right, and it might still be necessary to prepare, as you said,
Hmm.
but you can complement the two, and
Yeah, agreed.
yeah, and just put the label away and say, okay, it's going to be a conversation. Why
Yeah.
do I have to make it more difficult by calling it that? That
Right,
was
right.
my
It's
point of that article.
You're kind of dooming the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and so what's the biggest misconception, and unless you've mentioned it already, of course, because you've talked a lot about it already, but what would you say is the biggest misconception about introverts in leadership?
Well, certainly that they can't be leaders.
Mhm,
There's definitely many prominent examples, and honest, with as many, there's 50 to 60% of the population is some form of introversion, and I think you're in the middle. You're talking about ambiverts, so it's the majority of people. And the examples of leadership and leaders who are introverted are around you. And part of the reason we don't notice them is because they're not drawing attention to themselves. And there's something about that in our culture. It's very cultural based. That's one of the things I learned when I started researching about it is that what a leader looks like is culturally based. And because you can go to China and you can go to Japan, and the person who's always speaking, thinking aloud and drawing attention to themselves and has a lot of energy, they have a different word for that there. That person looks like a fool. And it's just a radically different way of, which I don't agree with either, and there's different styles like,
Yeah.
and you don't want to not pay attention to the person, drawing attention to themselves, because they could be the best leader, or but the the default assumption that they are is what's wrong.
Mhm.
And we need these different models. The other thing, why is it this way in the US? You look at the work of like Kahneman and Tversky, the thinking fast and slow, and all of our cognitive biases. And these are shorthand things that were hardwired to us, and through millions of years living on the savannah, and where, like, you're being attacked by animals, people, whoever it is, the person who kind of looks like a leader is probably a good bet to follow it, historically. But it's just a different world that we live in now. So that's where you can take a step back and really look at who are the most effective leaders around you, and what do they look like, and are the best ideas truly coming from the loudest people in the room? And when you answer that question, no, you can start to think about, okay, what leadership structures should we put in place to make sure that we are getting the best out of all of our people? You know, I wrote an article about brainstorming, and that took this idea also from that Susan Cain's work originally. There's study after study shows that um, there's sort of a classic model of brainstorming that grew out of um, the ad industry in the 1950s. This titan of industry came up with it. You get a lot of people in the room, and you go, and the louder the better, and the wilder the better, and this creates the best ideas. And this turns out this has been studied in business school for 40, 50 years, and it's just been proven over and again that's not the best method. And so really, in fact, the best method is to give people a chance to think about their ideas in advance, bring them to a room, and then share them and bounce them around once everyone's had a chance to think about that. And what that does is, it helps the introverts for sure, because they're able to think and do that thinking, where they do it at the best. But it actually helps the extroverts too. They come out and produce more and better ideas. So it's really a win for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, so let's go from brainstorming, so the storm in the brain, right, to mindfulness.
Oh yeah, let's calm the brain. Yeah,
How can mindfulness make you a more powerful leader, and especially as an introvert?
that's right. So my definition of executive presence is mindfulness,
Hmm.
and and we talked about this a little bit earlier. The power in the room belongs to the person who's most present in that room, because they can hold that room with that presence. And
Right.
so, yeah, and so introverts ought to be dominating this category. They aren't necessarily, because just because you're quiet and still doesn't mean you're necessarily mindful, because your mind could be racing and going and going and going. And so it's really everyone, in the tons of studies around this show, everyone can benefit from the mindfulness practice, and it makes you less reactive in situations, and so it helps conversations be more productive.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
but it certainly could be an advantage for introverts.
Yeah. I mean, the word mindfulness is weird anyway, because it's
Hmm.
like the mind is full. Okay, with what? With thoughts, with thoughts
Right.
racing. It's actually, it could mean the opposite of what we use it for, but
Hmm.
it's a funny word.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody knows what it's supposed to mean.
Right.
So,
It's full of what? Is the big
right,
question.
exactly. So, yeah, and of course, also the energy is an important piece of it. Of course, everything is energy in the end, but we also talk about managing our energy, about optimizing our energy, not just the quantity, but also the quality of our energy.
Mhm.
I personally love to talk about that. So it's also that energy that you bring to your presence, both the presence in the moment and your business or leader presence, right? Or that executive presence, whatever we want to call it.
Mhm.
So that can also be used by anyone, and it's a really important element. Now,
Absolutely.
yeah, did you want to add anything to that thought?
No, yeah, I'd just say that yeah, it can be
Mhm.
incredibly powerful for anyone.
Yeah. So then let's talk a little bit about communication, about verbal communication here, right?
Hmm.
So what's the secret to influencing others without being the loudest voice through conversations, through maybe words, vocabulary? Do you have anything to say about that?
Sure. Yeah, for introverts, one part of it is picking your spots in the room. I mentioned that that one example was a little bit of an extreme to wait to the very end. You can't necessarily do that, and unless you're higher up or something like that. But but knowing that when you have awareness that you aren't necessarily doing your best thinking on the fly, you have to pick your spots. But then for introverts, there's also a need to sometimes to hold the floor, and so you can finish your thoughts and get your thoughts out. And I had written an article about that as well, a bit of a framework where this can start out from the gentle to, sometimes it has to be more confrontational, where you're when if I'm pausing, I did it just there, I paused. And so
Mhm.
you might have jumped in on top of me, and I would need to if I want to keep speaking and hold the floor, I say, oh, hold on, let me finish, or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, and if it people keep on interrupting you, and I've been in these situations too plenty of times where it's like, hold on a second, let me finish. You may need to raise your voice and kind of set the tone. A lot of times introverts are people who don't necessarily bring the all the energy. Like, I come in a room and salespeople are going to be super loud, like great energy. They're spreading their, happy energy everywhere, but they have a lot of volume. And I'm sitting here, I'm just kind of quiet. I'm mindful Greg. And, so I have to match their tone if they're gonna hear me. I need to break through and get their attention. I want them to hear me. So there's that. And then sometimes you have to call attention to what's happening. It's like you've got to say, "Hey, look, we need to step. You keep interrupting me. I need to finish. Give me 5 minutes. I've got, I promise this is going to be quick, but we got to get through this." And so, you can see these techniques are ratcheting up the level of intensity, and that can be, part of. I forgot to mention my podcast it's for aspiring leaders. I really wanted to get this information to people who are maybe earlier in their career, and they might hear this and they're like, whoa, that sounds really intense. It's all things that can be learned and can be built up over time. um, these are some of the techniques for introverts.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one other thing, that so
Yeah.
one incredible introvert strength is the ability to make connections one-on-one. Introverts tend to prefer that. They like to go deep with people and form these deep connections. And so that is an incredible strength for you as an introvert. And the way that plays into leadership is creating these connections with people all around the company, in advance of whatever meeting is going to happen. So if you've done the work and people really know you and they trust you and they respect you, they bring that respect for you into that meeting. And so then when you go to speak, they're, they have all that respect, and they want to hear what you want to say, and they're giving you the benefit of the doubt, and they might even say, advocate for you. Wait, listen, let Greg speak. Um, this is these are kind of secrets. These are things that I also coached and mentored people with on my team who are more introverted. And so like you want to build up, it sounds a little bit, I don't know, it's manipulative, but it's, if you think about it as political capital, but there are things that you need to accomplish, and you're building these relationships for the people for sure, but also you're also doing business together. Sometimes you're going to need to lean on people to really help you out. And if you've helped them out and you've been, you go the extra mile, you're always there for them, they're going to be there for you when you need it as well.
Yes, great point. That is so, so true. And I can observe that with myself, that I really like one-on-one
Hmm.
conversations and connections. When I meet up with friends, I'm most comfortable meeting with one friend or a small group. Although it can be fun oftentimes also, when I've lived abroad for a long time in many different places. And when I travel home, it's a lot of fun to bring a group of friends together that you haven't seen in a while, for sure. But, oftentimes I really have that need in friendships to have that one-on-one conversation. And then also, of course, in a business and the business realm, it can be very, very helpful as well to be able to have those conversations with people. Absolutely. And Greg, tell us the name of your podcast again.
It is Powerful Introvert.
Okay.
That's right. It's the Powerful Introvert podcast.
Yeah. And I'm going to also add the link for sure, but just so listeners can check it out right after the episode is up if they want
Hmm.
to. Okay, now I have one more question for you. If you had to share one specific tip for quiet leaders or quiet aspiring leaders that helps them find their way in a world that often rewards extroversion, what would that be? And preferably one thing they can implement right away. It can be something simple.
Sure. One thing that's essential, especially if you're starting out, is to find somebody who is a mentor who believes in you.
Mhm.
And that was really critical for me at a certain point in my journey, to have somebody who said, "Oh yeah, you can be a leader," and he's somebody I really respected. And if you don't have that where you are in your workplace, then you need to go out and find that. You can look for people through LinkedIn or through friends, other organizations. It's just really critical. We really uh, need to find people who understand our experience and believe in us.
Yes, yes, great tip. Thanks for sharing that. Yes, and just want to reiterate that it doesn't have to be what someone in your company, in your organization, right? It
Exactly.
can definitely be someone from outside that actually also has its advantages. They bring a different perspective, an outside perspective, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, nothing wrong with that. So, Greg, anything else you would like to add before we call it a wrap?
Sure. One thing that I've been working on recently, and this is something that I've thought about a lot in my life, is how do you get your next promotion? And just how do promotions work? And really, what is it that kind of for you personally is going to motivate you to do all the work necessary to make any personal changes that are necessary, to have the difficult conversations necessary to get you there. And so I've put that into an ebook. It's pretty small. It's about 30 pages, but that's something that if that's something that interests you, then it's available for free when you subscribe to Powerful Introvert. It's, as you mentioned, and if you send me a direct message on the Substack platform, then I will send that to you.
Great. Thanks for offering this.
Mhm.
Yes. So, Greg, thank you so much for enlightening us today with your wisdom about introverts and about unconventional thinkers. Because, of course, a lot of a lot of people are unconventional thinkers among us, and they don't even think of themselves as unconventional thinkers, right? Or sometimes we think we are the only ones who are like that. And I think, we covered that through our conversation a little bit more intrinsically, so I didn't really insist on the unconventional thinkers here. But if there's anything you would like to add to that topic, then you're free to do so. And if not, we can just leave it here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of us are, if we give ourselves the chance to truly think for ourselves, we're going to think unconventionally.
Yeah.
So that gets back to, if you're able to be still and be mindful and give yourself that space to think the creative thoughts, they're going to be unconventional.
Yeah, and honor your own ideas, honor your talents, your skills, and everything you have. I call those your unique assets.
Yes.
Your ideas are definitely a part of that. So yes, unconventional thinkers is also really one of my favorite topics, actually, and and I think a piece of it is also in my book. So I want to just remind our listeners of my latest book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, Create the Life That's Perfect for You, which could include a lot of the wisdom that Greg has shared with us today. And if that's something that you want to do, create that life that's perfect for you anywhere in the world, then pick it up. You also will get some important leadership wisdom along the way. That's also included in the book. And I invite you to check it out on Amazon. So thanks for tuning in today. If you found value, share this episode with your friends or other people who might benefit. Post it on your social media if you want, and stay tuned for the next episode. And thank you again, Greg.
Absolutely. Thanks, Regina.
Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you liked this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, remember to rise to lead.